Good morning, everybody. Uh, Thank you for having me this morning. It's very different to be coming at you from a live stream rather than in person, where last year I had the pleasure of getting to meet many of you in Austria. And after a pretty wild series of plane rides and funny travel mishaps, I made it just in time. So this year is a bit calmer, but also a bit more distant. So, hi, my name is Bear. I lead the developer relations team over at Slack, and I'm here to talk to you today about the new work from home reality. So if you'll give me just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is some of the things that we've noticed as trends coming out as more and more people have shifted to working remotely and working apart from their teams. Um, as I said before, I'm Bear and I lead developer relations over at Slack. For those of you who are not familiar with Slack or haven't used it before, it's a workplace tool that replaces email inside your company. And more, it has also become the virtual office where everyone shows up and talks about their work and collaborates on a daily basis. So we've had a firsthand look into how people have been working during the last 3 months when we've been physically separated and distanced, and how that has changed our work from home reality. So I wanted to begin with a question that the New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo asked about 2 weeks in to May, which was Mental Health Month. How are you really? It's a hard question to ask colleagues, where sometimes you might be uh, feeling like you have to show up in a particularly professional way sometime. But the reality of these days is that we're not just working from home. We are working through a pandemic, and it's not the same. The usual rules are off. People are faced with situations for needing to take care of others. They might not have the physical space in their home that they would need to be working, and it is even harder to be working from home when the president of your country is using military force against civilian protesters who are denouncing systemic racism. And I would be remiss if I didn't begin there, because this is not just a US problem. And the Black Lives Matter protests that have been happening in London, in Amsterdam, Berlin, Brussels, Athens, Copenhagen, Madrid, Warsaw, Milan show that it has been top of mind for a lot of us. And if it hasn't been top of mind for you, please do consider that you are lucky and privileged, and that others that you work with and others that you interact with on a daily basis may not be so privileged. So this is all to say that this is the context in which we are working today. It is not just a matter of, well, I guess we're all home now. There is much happening in the world that affects how we are coming and showing up to work on a daily basis. So don't forget that question, how are you really, when you're thinking about how you're working with your team? Because it's going to be like this for a while, probably. You might have seen in the news, lots of tech companies are announcing that they are going to let their workers stay remote either through the end of the year or perhaps even indefinitely. This is going to be a dramatic shift for a lot of folks in the tech sector. And as we may see this trickle out to lots of people who are knowledge workers as well, meaning you don't have any sort of physical manufacturing that you need to do. Your work can be taken remote, and it might continue that way in the long term. So I wanted to share with you some information about what we've learned so far about how people do work, and some tips, tricks, and best practices, as I know many of you are entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting your own company, and how are you going to do this with a distributed workforce. So one of the things that we observed was that between February 1st and March 25th, Slack added 9,000 new paid customers, which was an 80% increase over the entire quarterly total for the preceding 2 quarters. So massive jump as people realized that they needed to make a digital transformation very, very quickly. And what we saw too was that the people who already use Slack increased their usage of Slack. People were sending more messages, and we've got data points for different cities in the US, sending more messages, they were connected more. Though we were pleased to see that for all of the messages that they were sending, they were mostly sending this activity during work hours. So we're not seeing a dramatic increase in people working in the middle of the night. We're not seeing expectations really changing around hours there. Interestingly enough, we just had an article come out in the British press about the way that this has been reflected in the UK. People tend to be starting their days a little bit later and finishing a little bit earlier, curtailing the workday. People are sleeping more. I saw an article by Fitbit about how the average number of minutes people are sleeping every single night has gone up. It's broken down by age and by region of the world, but it has changed the cycle of our workday a little bit. So when you're thinking about this, the circumstances, the context are extremely different. The hours are somewhat similar. People are much more invested in connecting online. How are you going to manage this, both as a person on a team and also for those of you who are starting things as a leader of a team? So we've got some tips, being Slack, about how you can use Slack more effectively. Um, and this is true whether you're using any other workplace communication tool. So creating announcements channels can be a very effective way to make sure that the most important things that you need everybody to know rise to the top. You can use these to make sure that people stay subscribed and also get the top news that they're expecting for a given day. Something we found very effective too is moving meetings to channel. This is something where if you are co-located with your coworkers and you just have 4 of you talking off the cuff about something that needs to be done, none of what you just said necessarily gets captured in writing for other people to be able to catch up and listen. So when you take the work and the time to move those meetings into a channel, you make it much easier for people who are not physically with you to understand what's going on and catch up. And this is particularly important if you work across time zones, because people may not be available at the same hours that you are, and being able to give them a way to catch up on what's happening enables people to stay on the same page much more easily. The other thing that's important is checking in with people one-on-one, and that can be either in DM or over a video chat. But you do have a lot of small interactions with people every single day when you're in an office. It might be a passing hello in the elevator. It might be that you chat while you're making a cup of coffee. And those small interactions are what can help build a team. So to make sure that those don't go by the wayside, a few of my colleagues at Slack have just started pinging people to say, hey, how are you today? And connect in a way that you might if you ran into somebody in the office. You don't need to have an agenda. You can just say hello. The next thing is about how people learn. Text is, of course, how a lot of us are communicating the words that we need, but sometimes you need to draw something or you need to whiteboard out an idea that you have. And the amount of effort that it takes to draw something in a slide deck versus what I'm doing right now with a pen and paper. I'm going to draw a stick figure and a smiley face, and I'm going to hold it up to the camera. And that took me about 15 seconds to do. And if I were trying to do that in a slide, it would take much, much longer. So figuring out the tools at your disposal and how you can work efficiently and not just using the internet in a way that feels like you have to be formal and presented in slides can be helpful. Making sure you get FaceTime when you need it is also helpful with your team to make sure that you've got that bonding time, and making the explicit space when you can say, I will be here from these particular hours can be especially helpful if you're a manager. And we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing is that you will be able to connect with others and work this way using shared channels if they all are also users of Slack. So if you've got other teams that you work with and it would be beneficial to you for you all to be able to connect in Slack, you can open a shared channel with those teams. One of the things that we've seen other people do is creative use of emoji in statuses. As we are no longer doing things like commuting or working remotely, of course we're already working remotely, we've seen some of our customers do things like add in explicit statuses for what they might be doing at home. That means that they need a particular amount of time or sets their availability. Communicating that you are not available right now because you are caring for a child, or you are out getting some exercise, or you have specifically carved out time for lunch is something that can help set expectations with your team. One thing that we have found as a team too is that being extra considerate of the lunch hour, even more so than we were in the office, is incredibly important. As people are cooking for themselves, they might be preparing lunch for children or family members. Not scheduling meetings during the lunch hour is fairly important. The other thing is spending some time to invest in your physical well-being. That might be everything from creating a more ergonomic workspace to just taking time to stretch, get up, drink water. We have a tool inside Slack called the Workflow Builder, and we have a few templates that are for working from home specifically, where you can download a way to add a reminder to Slack channels to just say, get up and drink some water. You can forget when you're not shuttling from meeting to meeting or walking around your office that you still have physical needs that need taken care of over the course of the day. So shifting a little bit to talk about leadership in this time. For managers, we have a few key tips, which are about creating opportunities for connection. And that can look like a few different things, but think of all of the ways that you chat as the team over the course of the day in the office and how you can mimic something like that and bring people together. That can be everything from creating a water cooler channel where people just talk about whatever's on their mind, like a random channel. Or it might be that you take groups of people and try and mix them up to have a conversation. There's a great app called Donut in Slack that pairs people who are interested with other people around the organization just to catch up and have coffee and a donut. Once you reach a certain size of team, my team of people has about 20 folks on it. And at 20, if we're all on a Zoom call, not everyone gets to talk. We're all accidentally talking over each other. It's much more effective if you break up into smaller groups and let people have those times together in groups of 3, 5, 6, or 7. It's also important to check in with your team on a regular basis about how they're doing with everything going on working remotely. People are going to have very different times handling their own work from home experience. And it's also going to change day over day and week over week. Some people may be fully okay for 3 days. They're super productive. And then you hit a wall. And after that, it's very, very tough. So keeping a pulse on with your team about how they're doing is incredibly important. I'm going to jump ahead to my 5th point, which is about focusing on results and not time spent, because related to keeping a pulse on how people are doing, one thing that's been helpful and effective for us is focusing on what needs to be done over a general time period and not necessarily what people are delivering at a specific due date. So what I mean by that is if you're having the kind of day where you're just staring at a blank wall and you know that you can't get past it on that particular day, it's helpful to have a list of the things that you know need to get accomplished, the things that can fall off, and what things are really important by a specific date for other people on your team. And it's incredibly important to create that clarity in your team so that everyone understands what other people have as their priority list. And if something slips by a day because a particular day was very, very hard, you understand how you can load balance and keep talking about that. And as part of understanding all of that, availability is important. And it's important to distinguish between constant availability. When you say be available, it doesn't mean be online 24/7. It means let people know when you will be there to talk to them and connect so that you can say, I've got office hours between 2 and 4 p.m. on Wednesday. I want to talk to you. I will be here. I will show up. And in all of this, striving for clarity in your written communication is incredibly important. Proofread what you write, edit it, think about creating more one-way communication. And one-way communication is things that you are broadcasting to the rest of your team that don't necessarily expect a response. Because during this time, people may or may not be able to respond, but they do need to be hearing from you on a regular basis about what our priorities are, how everybody's doing, and what the expectations are in a given day so that they can navigate their work from home reality based on what everyone's mutual expectations of what needs to get done are. And it's important in all this time to take time for fun. If you need evidence that laughter is a good thing and telling jokes is actually worthwhile for team results, there was a Harvard Business Review study that found that people who shared a funny or embarrassing story about themselves with their team produced 26% more ideas in a brainstorming session than people who didn't share those stories. And more than that, this is something that I think we can all agree feels intuitively true. When you're connected to other people on your team, you will feel better about working with them in a team. So we've seen people have great ways to have fun. Shopify had a dance challenge where they took all of the emoji in their workspace that have dancing icons, and then they tried to match what the dancing looked like. And it turned into a 2-day dance challenge with everyone contributing. This is amazing. Pixar released Zoom backgrounds so that you can use some of your favorite Toy Story backgrounds as part of your workday. And the Fastly team has an excellent blog post about some of the things that they've been doing to keep up their team spirit while working remotely. This is a screenshot of their CEO doing story time with kids from around the organization. At Slack, a colleague of mine did an origami session with some of our colleagues' kids as well, because what this bonding looks like, what fun looks like, is different for different people at different times. And you can create a variety of ways that people can show up, whether it's funny hat day at a meeting or something like this where you're engaging people's kids. In essence, the main thing is that while we're all working through these strange times, it's important to be kind to one another. It's important to to listen, and it's important to invest time in how you communicate. These might all seem like obvious conclusions, but it's much harder to put into practice than it is just to say on a stage. So think about how you're showing up to work. Think about what you need from other people, and above all, be kind. Thank you.